And welcome to the podcast. In this week's episode, we're going to explain all about humidity and what is it. We have a question from a fellow boiler engineer. And in the history section, we take a look into the hydrometer and with a very famous inventor. But first of all, here's my friend Sean to tell you a bit more about the podcast and why we do it. Are you a new person coming into plumbing and heating? Are you a homeowner that likes a bit of DIY? Or are you a business owner and wanted a bit more knowledge before you make some decisions on your plumbing and heating? Stay tuned to the podcast and hopefully we'll be able to help you out with some of your questions. And welcome back to the podcast, and thank you very much indeed, guys. I've just come back from a bit of a motorcycle adventure across Europe into Switzerland. It's been four days, long goings, very, very high temperatures. And while I've been on the motorcycle covering just under 1,400 miles in 4 days, up round by the Swiss Alps, going through some of the very famous passes that feature in the Gold film, Finger film and some others, I was just thinking, what can I do for this week's podcast? I'm a bit of a sad kid like that, I know. So I've come up with a couple of ideas for this week's. But first of all, I was talking to a fellow boiler engineer, and he said, why are boilers getting more expensive? Well, it actually goes down to the government CHMM, which is the Clean Heating Market Mechanism, and it places obligations on boiler manufacturers and not the homeowner. The manufacturers selling large number of gas boilers must also achieve targets for heat pumps in their sales. If they miss those targets, they can face financial penalties. Some manufacturers have increased their boiler prices to help cover these costs, and which is why the policy is now known as become the boiler tax. So that's why we've suddenly seen this massive jump in boiler costs, because the government are sort of taxing the members of the public indirectly for their new boiler purchases through some sort of penalisation from the manufacturers. If they don't push enough of their heat pump sales, then they're going to get absolutely penalised on their gas boiler sales. So that's the reason why, Gareth. I thought I'd look it up and tell you and let you know, mate. So Elon Musk in the news has become the richest person in the world in the last few weeks, and a value of $1 trillion. Now that is a phenomenal amount to try and get a head round. But let me just give you this little fact, and I heard this today actually. The second richest person is Larry Page, with an estimated value of around $288 billion. That means we're all closer in wealth to Larry than Larry is to Elon. And it's that gap is that much bigger, which is absolutely phenomenal. So next time you're feeling a bit poor, guys, just think about that. So the main topic for this podcast is humidity. And what is it? Have you ever looked at the weather app and seen it's only 22 or 23 degrees outside, but it feels absolutely unbearable? And when you hear someone say that they've just come back from Spain and it was 30 degrees over there, but it felt much nicer than this. And what's going on? Today, we're answering some of the questions or lots of people ask, why is the UK so humid? Well, let me explain what it actually is. Why Britain is one of the most humid countries in Europe, and why air conditioning isn't just about cooling, it actually makes you feel more comfortable. So let's start with the basics. Humidity is simply the amount of water vapour that is floating around in the air. You can't see it, but it's always there. The weather forecast actually talks about relative humidity, which is shown as a percentage. If the humidity was 100%, then the air is completely saturated and it can't hold any more moisture. If it's 50%, it still has room to hold much more. So warm air can hold far more moisture than cold air. That's why understanding the temperature is just as important as understanding the humidity. So why is the UK so humid? So let's take a look at that. So we're actually surrounded by water. So Britain is an island, as we all know, and we've got the Atlantic Ocean on one side and the North Sea on the other, and the English Channel just below us, and the Irish Sea in between us and Ireland. Every breeze that blows across the sea picks up a little bit of moisture before reaching land. We're constantly breathing in damp air. Most of the weather comes from the Atlantic, and our prevailing winds usually arrive on the southwest. They travel hundreds and sometimes thousands of miles across the Atlantic Ocean, where they carry huge amounts of moisture. That's one of the reasons why the winters are relatively mild compared with countries with the same latitude. So what's the downside? We have lots of moisture in the air coming across from the water. In the UK, it isn't that hot. This one surprises people. Our temperatures are relatively lower than places like Spain or Italy. The air doesn't need to hold that much water before it reaches a relatively high humidity. Imagine if you've got two buckets. One is tiny and one is huge. The tiny bucket fills much quicker. Cool air is just like the small bucket. Warm tropical air is just like the large bucket. So when you go through the UK and it contains actually less water vapor than somewhere like Thailand, it can still actually show 85 to 90% humidity. And here in the UK, it rains a lot. And there's no surprise really. After all, rainfall starts evaporating on the roads, the grass, the gardens, the roofs, and the trees release the moisture as well. And all that water goes straight back up into the atmosphere. And with the high pressure at summer, we get those lovely hot spells. The wind often drops, and with little wind, the moisture just hangs around. The overnight temperatures fall and the air reaches saturation. That's why we wake up and there's a dew or a mist and sometimes a fog in the morning. But why does humidity make us feel so uncomfortable? This is where it gets interesting. The body cools itself by sweating, but sweating isn't what cools you. It's the evaporation of the sweat. The humidity is high and the air cannot absorb much more moisture, so the sweat stays on your skin instead of evaporating, so you feel sticky, hot and uncomfortable. That's why a 24 degrees day here in Kent can feel worse than a 30-degree day down in southern Europe. And the thermometer doesn't tell the whole story. Fans versus air conditioning. A lot of people think fans cool in a room. It doesn't. A fan simply moves the air across your skin that helps the sweat evaporate quicker. If the air already is humid, the fan becomes less effective. Air conditioning is different. It actually removes the heat from the room. But here's the bit that people don't realise. It actually removes the moisture from the air. As well as the air passing over the cold indoor coil, the water condenses and drains away. The room actually becomes cooler and drier. That reduction in humidity often makes people feel more comfortable before the temperature has actually dropped at all. A simple example, imagine two identical rooms, both are 24 degrees, but one has 75% humidity and the other one's 50. Most people will say the second one feels cooler, even though the thermostat says exactly the same. But that's the power of the humidity. So in the UK, often in the mornings, the humidity can be above 90%. Relative humidity can actually reach 100% overnight. Tropical countries contain far more water vapour than the UK because the air is warmer and the relative humidity can actually be lower. The air conditioning doesn't just cool, it acts as a dehumidifier. So the humidity actually changes our body's experience to heat. And that's why British summers can often feel surprisingly uncomfortable, even when the temperatures aren't actually particularly high. So if you find yourself struggling to sleep, finding your home sticking or uncomfortable in your office, it might be not just the heat, but the actual humidity as well. I've just come back from the trip down into the Swiss Alps, and we had 42 degree sort of air temperature at points that was being measured on the motorbike. And that was really, really hot, but it felt a bit hotter and a bit more uncomfortable here than in the UK. because down there, yes, we had snow and was doing snowball fights and stuff, which was absolutely bizarre up in the mountains the other day, because there was still some snow around. Up at altitude was about 27 degrees, and it was the ice and the snow was still melting because obviously the thickness of it, and being white as well, the snow actually reflects the sun's rays, being the light colour. So it is, you would think it'll actually melt a lot faster, but because the light shade of it actually reflects it back, so it doesn't absorb the heat as quickly as certainly if wearing black bike gear. So, but the humidity was actually very low. The wind was up as well. So what sweat you did have sort of did dry off, and it did actually feel a lot cooler with that air passing through, even though the air was very warm, but it was actually very, very dry. So, yeah, so that's a little bit on humidity, guys. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense for you. So that leads us on to the history section, and we're going to talk about the hydrometer. So measuring humidity in the air is relatively a modern invention, but it actually dates back to over 500 years. The first known idea come from none other than Leonardo da Vinci. Around the late 1400s, he realised that certain materials absorb moisture from the air and become heavier. And this wasn't especially accurate, but it was the first step to understanding how humid our environment really, really was. Fast forward to 1783, and the Swiss scientist named as Horace Benedict de Saussage come up with a much more reliable design. And with this clever bit of kit, he used a human hair. Believe it or not, human hair stretches out so slightly when it becomes more humid, and then shrinks back when it dries out. By connecting a strand of hair to a needle, he could measure the changes of humidity surprisingly accurately. That design was used in weather stations for many, many decades. During the 1800s, engineers developed what's called wet and dry bulbs hydrometers. Using the two thermometers, one kept wet and the other one kept dry, and the difference in temperature between them actually was the humidity to be calculated. And it's still used today in very accurate reference methods. Nowadays, of course, we have compact digital sensors inside weather stations, thermostats, air conditioning systems, or even in smartphones, and they can measure humidity electronically at a fraction of a second. So hopefully that goes to explain some of the questions about this time of year and why we just feel so much more, it feels more close, some people describe it as, which is actually humidity. So I've done a rough calculation. I've only got a terraced house. I actually calculated the other day when I had about 1.5 litres of water inside my lounge in my front room with the current temperature and the humidity that we had at the time. So that's 1.5 litres of moisture that was just in the air. And then it starts going into the soft fabrics. And then it's called the dew point, when the surface temperature is lower, then it starts to stick to it. Exactly the same when you go into a pub and you see the beer column thing, and then you see all the water droplets on it. And that's actually just the humidity of the air being attracted to the surface of the coldness of the beer pump, and it sticks to it and creates all that condensation running down. But just remember, a lot of that in a pub is actually from breath. So it's not just from the outside, the condensation. So that's people's expelling through their head, foreheads, arms, legs, backs, the lot. So don't sort of lick it up and think, oh, that's a bit of fresh water. It certainly is not. So be careful with that one, guys. So that concludes this week's episode, and thank you very much indeed for listening. So we had a couple of winners last week, and we contacted those to receive their prize for the mystery word. So thank you very much indeed. Off the top of my head, I've actually forgotten your name. So one's an avid listener, so thank you very much indeed, and is doing their level 2 plumbing. So thank you very much indeed, and I hope you find some of what we do interesting. So if you're listening to a podcast and you can find one person that you think might be interested in it, please share it with them. Please like and subscribe and push that bell buttons or wherever you listen to your podcast. It helps promote it and push it out to the wider audiences of a similar, if someone's listened to another podcast on plumbing, this one could then play directly after it and it goes out. I don't earn money from it and I'm not interested in earning money from it. I just want to get a little bit of knowledge and information over to the people, the DIYers out there, and my little way of giving back to people in the plumbing community. You take care, guys. Have a fantastic week. Goodbye.